Welcome, everyone. I call this meeting of the Governance Committee to order. We'll start with a roll call. Councilor Lombardi?
Here.
Councilor Tabor?
Here.
And I'm Councilor Cook, and I'm here. The first item on our agenda today is the approval of the minutes from June 13th, July 1st, and July 25th. Has everyone had an opportunity to look at those? Okay. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
Yes.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye. All right. The meeting minutes are approved. Today we are going to be discussing, continuing our discussion of committees and ordinances and our review of those. The first thing under our agenda today is a proposed public art ordinance for a public art review committee. There are two changes we're talking about. First is our current city council policies, just a slight amendment to those so that public art would be reviewed by a public art review committee. So it alters those to take into account the proposed ordinance to establish a public art review committee. And today I have invited Nancy Pearson to come to the committee to talk to us about how this idea originated, the idea of a public art review committee. Would you mind joining us?
Good morning. Sure. Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. It's so nice to see you. Thank you for all your hard work on this committee and on the council. It's been a pleasure not to watch, I have to say. So as far as these guidelines go, we're going back to about, I would say, 2013, 2014 ArtSpeak days, when we noticed that although the city had a ArtSpeak was doing some public art administrative work for the city per an MOU between the city and ArtSpeak. And although the city did have the public art percent for art ordinance, that we rarely ever saw the city following through with any of these policies. And in fact, in the history of the ordinance, we've only had one project come to fruition, which was at Foundry Garage. And this was before even these policies. So what ArtSpeak decided to do was research and draft a comprehensive set of public art guidelines for the City Council to adopt and for the city to follow. So ArtSpeak created these guidelines. It was members of ArtSpeak, Kathy Sununu, Robin Lurie Meyerkoff, and middle school art teacher Anna Nuttall were the three main architects of the guidelines, which were passed and voted on as policy by the City Council. I believe it was 2014. And that gave us something to fall back on and to point to anytime the city would sort of go off script when it came to public art. Then what happened after I left ArtSpeak, I'm not really sure, I can't give you exact dates, but ArtSpeak sort of went in a different direction than the MOU and the city needed, and the city broke its connection and its ties with ArtSpeak. And ArtSpeak eventually dissolved as an organization. And when that happened, there was no entity to perform the tasks in the city's policy as it stands, because ArtSpeak was responsible for creating the park, the Public Art Review Committee, and all of the things that happened with that. So I believe that is pretty much what Kate picked up, and I had conversations with her about the fact that we had these policies. They are adopted policy, but there's no entity to enact the policies.
Thank you so much. Did anyone have any questions for Nancy while she's here?
We've had the situation come up with this council, Nancy, of people who want to donate art and we think it's, did ArtSpeak have that situation arise? And how did you deal with that? Did ArtSpeak have dialogue with the donor, or did they just make a recommendation to the council?
Both, yes. That was part of what ArtSpeak did, and that happened even before the guidelines were in place. And generally, what ArtSpeak would do is impress upon the donor that along with the art piece, the donation needed to be included a fund in that would repair the work or update the work or whatever needed to be done with the work that was essentially about 10% of the worth of the work. And sometimes the donor would agree to that, and sometimes they couldn't or wouldn't, and in which case we worked with the city manager to figure out that piece of it. But that was the role of ArtSpeak, that now there's no longer any entity to do that. And per the guidelines that the city had adopted were some of the things to look for and some of the things to go by. So it wasn't just that a committee would get together and say, we like it or we don't like it. Those aren't the criteria. There's a whole bunch of criteria when you're evaluating and accepting public art. And that's what the committee and that's what the guidelines specifically call for. So really anybody could step in that role and follow the rubric or the criteria.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, that would be the thing that I would think of too.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming and giving us the history.
My pleasure. I'll just be right there in case something else comes up.
Great, thank you so much. What you'll see in your packet today is a draft ordinance that sets up a public art review committee, and that's to replace the non-existent review process that we don't have anymore because ArtSpeak no longer exists at the city level. And the draft language I took directly from the public art guidelines, and you'll see there are red lines in your draft. That's because of a discussion I've had back and forth with the legal department, just altering those slightly so that they fit within the guidelines for ordinance, essentially. But it doesn't change the public art guidelines. Those are still adopted. This is a separate ordinance that would establish the Public Art Review Committee. So we can go through it if you would like, kind of section by section.
I think that would be good because, whatever reason, did not get to review it earlier, so.
It's completely reasonable, and this is new for us, so I'm going to share my screen so that people at home can see what we're talking about. This is straight from the packet, which is available on the city website. So if you want to pull it up on the city website, that's great. You can have a copy at home, but I'm sharing it here for the purpose of this review. The first part of this draft ordinance defines the membership in term, and most of these guidelines came straight from the public art guidelines that were adopted. The few changes that were made is that we reduced the number of city staff, mostly because of issues around trying to reduce the number of hours that we're asking city staff to sit in committee. Because we have so many committees at this stage. So we've reduced that to a designee from the city manager to sit on the committee instead of one library, one DPW. So we would have one individual from the city, and then we'd have members of the community. And we've asked the members of the community to have specific expertise in areas around art and public art. And then the rest of the members will be appointed by the mayor, as we do with most committees. And they would have staggered terms varying from 2 to 3 years, again, trying to preserve expertise on the committees. And the committee would be chaired by a member of the local arts community. So that's the membership in
Yep.
terms. If anyone has any questions, let me know. Just speak up, or I'll just keep going. Powers and duties. These are the responsibilities outlined for the committee. Some of these have just been slightly altered from the guidelines. And that was altered basically to make sure that we have a proper land use review from land use boards, rather than things being referred directly. We want to make sure that land use boards can also refer things to the Public Art Review Committee, that they have that opportunity. I know we've had some concerns from some of our land use boards when they have an art piece come before them, that they don't have the expertise to review that. So we want them to be able to review it, not just city council review and referral. So you'll see that change there. And then also, I was interested in potentially having a review process for art on private property. I think we still have questions around that. That would actually have to come through the land use boards. And then also, their role would be to help the city on acquisition, maintenance, and marketing of the public art collection, developing a stewardship
I have
policy.
a question about the private property. How do you imagine that would work? I mean, I don't.
My concern was that whenever somebody wants to install an art piece on private property, that it's going to go through a land use board because it's a big enough piece, it's a permanent installation, that the Public Art Review Committee would have a role in looking at that, not just one of the land use boards. But that's why we altered this to put in the land use boards can refer to the Public Art Review Committee. So think about it in like the historic district, if somebody wants to put a mural on the side of a storage shed, and the HDC does not feel comfortable with limiting that or reviewing that, because right now, if you look at the HDC guidelines for the city, you don't have limitations on paint and paint color. But say somebody's painting a mural, well, then you have this question of, well, is that really appropriate? Then the HDC could seek support and review from the park as well.
I think that in the HDC, one of the things that is limited is advertising.
Yes.
So if the mural was seen as advertising, and we went through this specifically, then that was not allowed. But I'm really hesitant to, regulate, how people paint their houses or their barns. I have a problem with that.
Just to clarify, this does not add any additional regulation. The only thing it does is allow the land use boards, if there's some element that is coming up within the development process that has a art component, then there's that opportunity for referral. So it's not adding any additional layer of regulation. So if there's any confusion on that point, so whatever you're allowed to do by law right now, you are continued to allow to do. So if you're putting some sculpture in your backyard, that's not an issue. The only point of this was really to give the land use boards, to the extent there is some art element, that they would feel more comfortable having people who understand the art element better and how that might intersect, that the land use boards would have an opportunity to get input from another arm. So it doesn't add any layer of regulation.
I just have a problem with regulating art, except perhaps in the historic district.
Yes, I think the goal is actually to eliminate some of the concern around regulating art, allowing them to say, okay, we don't have an expertise in this. Let's let the Public Art Review Committee chime in and share their views on, on art. And that would be a more open audience to public art, because the goals of Public Art Review are to encourage placement of art in the city. So it's allowing them that extra opportunity to hear from people who actually are interested in more public art, to share their views on a piece like that in the community. I think that's the concern, rather than just saying, no, you can't do that, we don't know how, we don't have the expertise to evaluate that. I think that's the concern. We don't want people shutting down art opportunities because they feel uncomfortable.
So, I mean, in a sense, we're creating a jury, an art jury. I don't know. I mean, I will have to think about that a lot more before I would agree with it.
I should note that we already have that problem, though, within the city, because right now, the HDC acts, and sometimes the zoning board and planning board act as that jury for public art. And that has been a challenge already, as we've seen with some of the public art projects that have come forward in downtown, that they actually were tasked with reviewing something and weren't necessarily, I can't speak for them, but not necessarily comfortable with that process, and are in a situation where they don't know if they should just reject it outright. So they're already acting in that role without anyone to consult. And I think that's the concern, is giving them that opportunity.
I think the other piece in here is that you'll see, they only accept referrals. So if the land use board felt that it was not something that they wanted to continue to handle under their current jurisdiction, they could. It is simply setting up the opportunity for this art committee to look at something if it's referred to them. So they don't have independent jurisdiction. So, if that helps.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll still reserve.
It's fine. It's fine. Yes.
Be interested in an opinion from our deputy city manager and a legal opinion. If a private citizen places art that's visible to the neighborhood or surrounding buildings in a commercial area, they choose private art and put it on private property. Is that public art? Do we have jurisdiction over that?
No, at this point, no.
Yeah.
Unless you, I mean, you may have a different view, but if it depends if we're talking private residential property, and generally if it's not advertising, no.
So we did have an occasion of just that with the mural of Ruth Blay that went up last summer. That was on a private commercial building on Court Street across the street from the new PHA project. Have any of you noticed that? Okay. So that project had to go before both the HDC and the ZBA, I believe, and that is where then former chair David Rayum was extremely uncomfortable having the conversation about the artwork and whether or not it constituted advertising or not advertising, or and it was private property, and it was paid for by private money, and we still had to go through circles and circles of conversation on art versus advertising and people not understanding. And I don't know that this committee, that referral fixes that, but I can tell you that is an example of exactly what you're talking about. And as somebody who is on the board of directors of Friends of Ruth Blay bringing this project to fruition, it was extremely disheartening to listen to the conversations about the subject matter and art in general on a private property. So I just want to let you know that this is happening. I don't know that this is a great solution. I'll let you guys debate that, but it did happen.
Yeah, and within the HDC that has its own, yes, special rules and regulations. So I was
Well, my
thinking-
understanding, it wasn't necessarily the HDC, the ZBA, it was because it was, there was wording, you know, there was, it's called a tombstone, and it explains what the artwork is, and that fell under signage.
Signage, right.
But that's
the-
anywhere in the city.
Yeah, there are nuances.
Right.
If it's signage versus
Right.
Sculptural piece is what I had in mind.
So so that's the conversation that happens. Is it artwork or is it signage? And that's the slippery slope that I think you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, very nuanced, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Right. So we're trying to address that by providing the additional option for referral to public art review so that you can have experts on public art weigh in, essentially, to support our land use boards. And while I personally would like to see stronger language so that they're required to have required for art to go before a public art review, I don't think we can usurp the authority of our land use boards in review because of state RSA and their role. So this was to provide that extra opportunity, and we'll keep discussing it. This is not the day for decisions on this. So I think that's an important element to this too.
I'm just not sure we can regulate bad taste much as we'd like to on private property.
That's right, or define bad taste.
Right. Definitely not. Definitely not. But we can at least allow people, support people in allowing actually experts to consider whether or not something is art versus signage, or rather than being concerned about it following very strict guidelines, I think.
I fully support this on public property. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and we do have the comfort of knowing that this is referred by a land use board to the park, and it comes back with an opinion, but the ultimate decision is still the land use board's.
Yes.
And that's as statutes govern, you know, which limits their powers.
Right. I don't think the goal is to limit art at all by this process. I think the goal is to allow for more art by this process, to not have land use boards reject it outright because they don't understand kind of the artwork or the art piece. Rather let experts give an honest opinion about whether or not this is an art piece. So that the land use boards feel more comfortable in making those decisions. I think that's why this was included, specifically because I was concerned about the Ruth Blay situation and what had occurred, and also the situation at Tuscan Market downtown with the art pieces, murals on the side of their building.
Right, but that was a historic district.
Exactly. So it was about making sure that we provide this additional venue to support public art.
And I would just add, if I may, that throughout history, it's the art experts that were most critical of avant-garde, anytime avant-garde art. So just, you know.
Right. So you have to be careful.
Well,
Yeah. So let's keep discussing that element of this
okay.
at our next meeting, or you'll see that the rest of the guidelines here just fall straight from the public art guidelines that are adopted by the city. Some of these we like just reviewed and removed and moved up. Like, so we essentially just reordered some of them so that it was clear what the priorities were. We actually, since we already named stewardship in the earlier paragraph, that's why this is removed, collaborating with the library on public art collection. You'll see that that is also removed there. And then below that, the meeting requirements. We didn't want this to be incredibly restrictive. We didn't want a committee that I think was meeting all the time. It's a committee that should meet as needed, but at least quarterly because of the tasks beyond tasks of reviewing public art. The tasks around stewardship and encouraging public art would require at least a quarterly meeting. Now, they could meet more frequently if they decided to. And then the Public Art Review Committee would report back to the City Council, looking at potential resources in the Public Art Trust, proposed municipal capital projects, and inclusion of art in design, and emphasizing public art projects and that advance economic development opportunities. So the idea is that their role is not just to review, but to make some recommendations to the city to encourage more public art development in the community and ways that we can do that. And then we added this idea of revenue development, soliciting and receiving gifts that can go into a public art trust. And that is not just for maintenance of art that is acquired, but also installation of public art. And, but again, like all committees, they can't expend monies unless the trustees of the trust funds decide that it's reasonable for them to expend monies from a public art trust. And then I think it's critical. This is the guidelines. These are the guidelines that are already here in the funding of public art. You'll see that's also included in your packet. The definitions of public art, statement of purpose. This is already the guidelines that we have within the city. So we would request a change here. It's section 11704. And the reason for this change is a concern around the ease with which the council can currently choose to not commit funds for public art with a new capital project. A good example is the new wastewater treatment plant, where funds were not set aside for public art. Instead of allowing the council just to say, well, this isn't a good place for public art, so we're not going to have a public art piece associated with this project. Instead, they would identify another publicly owned property within the city where you could place that public art piece.
I actually think that the treatment plant is an excellent place for some public art myself, but
Right.
it faces, it's another gateway to the city.
And just for clarification, there is money in this year's budget once the city council decided that they wanted to continue with the art. So there is money in the budget that will go to the trust for its share of public art. So maybe once this committee, if it gets launched, gets going, then there'll be a action to take. So.
Yeah.
the Public Art Trust is established? Do we know what's in it? How much is in it right now?
Oh, I had that figure handy and I don't at the
It's
moment,
some
but yeah.
amount.
Yes.
Yes.
I would, if I may, we might look at the issue that happened in Kittery with private property and a private building that was painted as an art piece. And that actually went to the courts, I believe. And, it, you know, it was
Right.
informative, I guess. Of course, that's Maine, but nevertheless.
It's definitely worth continuing to review that. Yes.
I was looking at the language about the chair of the Public Art Review Committee. It's a little unclear to me, it's a little fuzzy, whether the chairman is appointed by the mayor or elected. This says, "The committee will be chaired by a member of the local arts community, and the chair will interview and make recommendations for openings. The term of the chair is for 1 year with eligibility for re-election for 2 additional terms." So I would assume he's elected or she's elected by the other members of the committee. Should we clarify that?
I would agree with that. I think that's the way it should work, and maybe should be specified.
We can clarify that. I don't think that it's, most of our ordinances are not very specific about the way that it's done, but we can clarify that if we really want to here. I think that that's reasonable.
So each year, the review committee would elect their chairman once again.
Yes. So, clarify chair.
And would the committee have the same rotating membership that other committees have too?
Yes, I think that the language says people would be elected to between 2 and 3 year terms to create a stagger.
Okay.
So
It's in there, yeah.
I think that that is the plan,
Okay.
to create a stagger in membership.
We might also want to add a provision that they meet quarterly or at the discretion of the chairman. If they need to meet more frequently or less frequently. I'll just put that out there for discussion.
Okay. Yes, I think the language currently just says that they're required to meet quarterly at a minimum. But we can add to that language as well so that it's really clear that they can meet more than quarterly.
So right now, I see it
Go
says
back
the
up.
park shall meet as necessary, but at least quarterly. So,
So
Yeah,
that provides for that.
yes.
Got it covered.
Are there any other questions about this ordinance, or should I keep going through the existing ordinance so that we know what's currently there? On the funding for public art. Now, again, this is the existing ordinance that we have in place. And all we're doing is changing the exemption so that the city council doesn't exempt public art for projects, rather that places them in other locations in the city if needed, on other pieces of public art or public property. And then the other changes on funding accepted. And this is a situation that I encountered this year where somebody wanted to donate money to commission a piece of public art for the city. It would add not just that funding can be accepted for public art trusts, but it also authorizes the council to accept donations with a designated purpose to commission works of art to be placed on public property. And the commissioning process shall follow the same procedures outlined in the ordinance for public art associated with capital expenditures by the city. which is this current ordinance. So we already have a process in place when we have a capital project for commissioning pieces of public art for that project, for that capital project. So this would just allow individuals to also donate funds to the city for specific purpose to commission a piece of art to go through this process. And because we'd have a public art review committee in place, it would be a lot easier to go through a process like this to commission a piece of art.
I think we had a situation where a person was actually donating a specific piece of
Yes,
art,
right.
and that was the one that brought up the question.
Yes, and I actually have somebody else who wants to donate funds for a specific purpose for art, but doesn't have a means to do that. We don't have a process currently at the city to donate funds to be used for a specific public art purpose. So this would allow somebody who doesn't have a piece of art in mind but has a purpose in mind to donate those funds for that specific purpose for the city to commission a
So couldn't
piece.
they just make a contribution to the trust fund that is a restricted contribution? Wouldn't that be the process that someone would use? If I had $20,000 that I wanted to create a piece of art that celebrated, me, and so I could contribute to the trust fund and say, well, this is designated to be a statue of me. Whether or not that would pass muster, I kind of doubt it, but
I think that it doesn't.
I think it would have to be more, obviously, more general.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You can go ahead and speak if you want.
Yeah, I mean, the city council does have the authority to accept funds for very specific purposes. I think the intention here was probably just to give it a little more process and a clear place for it to go without having to create something special. So,
Right.
there are ways for the city to accept funds with limitations on it and wrap it up with all sorts of conditions. That's why you have a section under your council agenda for grants and donations, particularly the grants, because they come with strings, and it's kind of more like that when you've got a lot of strings. So this is, as I see it, was intended just to say, okay, this will make it easier for the city council because there'll already be a place to put the money and a process to create the project and the artwork and get it installed. I guess that's how I saw it.
Yes, I think that was the goal here, was to trigger the process too, because somebody can make a donation to the Public Art Trust for a specific purpose, and that donation could sit for 100 years in the Public Art Trust if there's no trigger to trigger a process to create that art. So this specifically says where you can accept money to commission works, and this is the process that you'll follow to do that. So it kind of triggers that process, not just the donation. I think that's the goal. I would hate for anybody to make a large donation and have it sit.
Well, I mean, there's actually nothing wrong with that too, because it builds the fund that supports.
But especially not somebody who'd raised money to donate for a specific artwork,
Yeah.
To be installed and then to have it sit and not. I want to make sure that we are honoring contributions that are directed for a specific purpose. So that's the goal of this language here, to understand that a donation can come in for a specific purpose, and that we will honor that if we choose to accept the donation and go through the public art review process for that donation. So those are the only two changes to the existing ordinance, or recommendations that I had for changes to the existing ordinance. And then we would add on the ordinance from the Public Art Review Committee. And then, this is one of those complicated things because public art is, there's several places that it sits within city ordinances and policies. So then when we go back to the existing policies around public art, this gives us the opportunity to modify the current policies to reflect these changes, because the current policies refer to art speak, referring art to art speak. So this would change, and I just brought up City Council Policy 2009-6 to a public art referral and acquisition policy, and essentially change the language in that current City Council policy to remove art speak as the reviewer, and to establish that it goes to the standing committee, which would be the Public Art Review Committee. And because we have two city policies, too, around public art, we currently have a public art acquisition policy, and here I'm going to show those at home. The second policy, policy regarding public art. We would combine the two policies, so it's one policy, so it's less confusing for individuals. And we just took the language from the City Council Policy 2014-2, the public policy regarding public art, and added it directly into the other policy. So it is here. Whenever from any source an issue relating to public art should be brought to the attention of the City Council, that matter will be referred to the standing committee. So that's basically, we just combined two policies here. And then also, instead of requiring that public art, outdoor art must include a cash stewardship donation of 10%, we would allow for it should include a donation of at least 10% to cover the cost of maintenance and stewardship of the public art. That gives the council the opportunity to be a little more flexible there if they choose, if we have enough money in the public art trust to do stewardship. You know, that's a decision that basically leaves the decision to the council on whether or not we need the extra 10% in donation. But it's still, it's important to consider that we do, that it's important to have an additional amount of funds for stewardship. But if something were really, really important and we didn't have the additional funds for stewardship, the council could choose to expend other funds for stewardship or allocate those funds for stewardship. And so again, this just removed language art speak and called it the committee. And the reason we didn't specify public art review committee and we just use languages around standing committee and the committee is in case the name changes over time, that we don't have to go back and revisit this policy. The change from time to time, that was actually just putting dashes in there. That was just a grammatical change. So those are the only changes to the public art policy, is combining the two and removing references to art speak and changing it to the committee and the standing committee, and then changing, the substantive change would be changing it from must to should on cash stewardship. That's it. So-
all right. I'm going to have to look at this.
Yes, I think it's important that everybody take a good look at these. But I thought it was important today that we hear from Nancy Pearson and that we go through and look at these in detail. Does anyone have any other questions right now, or are we ready to move on to our next item? We can discuss this again at our next meeting in more detail.
I think we should be careful about waiving the 10%
Yeah.
stewardship. I think that was a thoughtful language when it was created, because there is a cost to the citizens
Right?
to maintain this. The art at Foundry Place is new, but 10 years from now, it'll probably need cleaning or repairs or maybe sinking into the ground, who knows? So there was some good thought put into that.
Yeah. I don't know of any organization that does not require a portion for ongoing maintenance of something or support of it.
Right. And I agree that we should have, we should make sure we have funds for maintenance. And honestly, we can change this or not change it. I'm flexible on that. In any case, the council can always vote by 2/3 majority to change the, to take a different action, even if it's a policy of the council. To suspend the rules and change and accept a donation without the 10%. So it's a, I think that this is one of those things that's fairly flexible.
Okay?
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts before we move on?
Nope. I think
Okay.
that's good.
Yes.
I was just going to suggest, since we have a member of the Cable Commission here, if you wanted to flip the order, the committee wants to do that.
Okay. We can do that. Is everyone okay with that? If we,
Yes.
okay. Again, thank you, Nancy, for joining us today. The next item on our agenda, then, we're going to switch two things around and instead talk about the Cable Television and Communications Commission first. And so we actually have someone here joining us, and James Hewitt, who's come from, Jason Hewitt, sorry, Jason. Jason, would you mind joining us and talking to us a little bit about the status of the Cable Television and Communications Commission? I want to note that this came on our agenda because of a request from the committee. So that's why we've invited him here today.
Good morning, councilors. Thank you for your time this morning.
You want to
Speak
pull the
into the mic.
microphone
Sorry.
closer? Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you for your time. I'm new to the commission myself, a resident of Portsmouth now for about 1 year and 3 months. One of the reasons that brought me to the commission to begin with, and some other concerns that we've discovered, is the, I'd say, inadequate state of what I'll call internet access via wireless or via cellular in several areas of the city that are troubling in many ways. Additionally, though, as we kind of look at the challenges for the actual, I'm messing up the name of it, the charter or the grant for the cable, the actual cable charter.
Franchise.
Sorry, thank you. Franchise agreement. Looking at trends on that and looking at subscription trends, certainly there's a trend that, subscribers, are down. And this is because people have shifted their viewing preferences over to what I'll call internet delivered. But yet, at the same time, we're struggling with the idea of this internet is still delivered via the physical properties of the cable that the franchise itself was agreed to provide right-of-way for. So we see all these issues kind of intermingled to some degree, and we were kind of thinking that maybe we ought to be clear on what our charter is, what the commission should be doing, and we've kind of proposed some language to present some ideas to see if there's interest in the council about representing the citizens on these issues. Thank you. I can walk through this if you would like. Would that be
Okay,
useful?
sure.
That would be, thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to focus largely on the changes itself in the red. We expand the definition from the in paragraph A and the section A in the second paragraph. In the sentence, the operation of cable television as well as the delivery of broadband internet services via multiple physical transport methods. And so while there's no real, governance of this, it would allow us to kind of explore and talk to providers beyond just the cable television themselves. So, for example, Verizon, but also bring into scope providers like,
Fairpoint.
Thank you, Fairpoint.
Yeah,
What used to be
whatever.
Fairpoint, right?
They're called something
Consolidated.
else now.
Right, absolutely. Right, and so that we can just address service quality overall. And then the next set of changes, again, is to add in section B, to add the term "and broadband internet." I believe we made some kind of housekeeping changes next. So shall serve in, again, second paragraph, advisory capacity to the Cable and Broadband Internet Commission, and to remove kind of the reference to standing subcommittees as being something we could address if needed, but we just didn't see the need. Let's see. We simplified the language in section C, really just to talk about the powers, shall oversee the operation of the existing cable television franchise agreement and any future agreements city council may approve. And then again, as well as assist in the negotiation of such agreements. And as a need arises, consider the availability and quality of broadband internet services delivered via any physical transport, which includes, again, we felt it important to call out physical cabling or over-the-air delivery, and work to understand the needs and desires of the citizens of the city of Portsmouth. And further, the committee may work with any relevant providers to meet those needs, as appropriate and guided by the city council. So, and again, we've had actually a new member or a new person express desire to be a member of the commission, and I know that that membership has been a challenge for that commission as far as numbers. He specifically has come to us because he's very frustrated with data access issues that we have with the cellular network itself. So, just to provide a little more color, we had discussed in one of the meetings the idea of basically sending out an invitation letter to the various cellular providers in the area, just to have an open discussion to talk about what the barriers they may see to improving the service to the residents of the city of Portsmouth.
Thank you. It's actually very helpful, your explanation, so.
Just comment again, I hear a lot of people are frustrated with Comcast specifically. There are two new players, I think. It's the 5G now, which is pretty adequate for having general broadband access, and as well as, of course, Fairpoint fiber optic. I would just make it broad enough to include, and I think you have, I haven't read it carefully, but that there may be other technologies coming down. I mean, obviously there will be, because this is a very competitive field.
Absolutely.
And we've been living under a fairly monopolistic process for a long time. So I think to encourage competition in this would be a great advantage.
And I'll just add in, it's part of the conversation we've had at the Cable Commission, which is, we don't, at a local level, have a lot of, regulatory levers that we can use, but sometimes we can use just our voice and our advocacy and maybe identify barriers. And I really kind of appreciated the thinking, is there something that we're doing from a municipal point of view that is making it harder rather than easier to get the kind of competition that we'd like to see? So it's kind of looking at it from both perspectives, which is, can we, kind of say, we really do deserve better internet delivery with whatever, modality that we're getting it from. And also, is there something we can do here to increase that competition? And the committee's willing to kind of see if they can look at that and maybe find a way to make some, invite some improvements, I guess is how I like to look at it. Invite some improvements, because that's really where we're going, so.
I think the other thing I'll offer, if I may be permitted, is that as we struggle to address the declining enrollments that drive the franchise fees that come to the city, I think inviting other providers of similar services together could result in maybe some creative solutions to preserve that funding, to preserve the funding of the public television in the area. Because we become a little concerned that Comcast could say that given how people are consuming content, is it really on us now to provide funds, for public television, for that very reason, right? Should we be funding YouTube could be a question they would have, or something along those lines. So we think by expanding the mission or the scope, then it gives us a little more opportunity to get some different ideas. If we could get a meeting going with these providers, who knows what we might hear from them.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Councilor Tabor?
I think, I applaud the initiative, because I think we're really skating to where the puck is going with this. I just saw that streaming video over internet audience is larger now than cable audience, just as a couple of months ago. And to your point about the franchise fees, the FCC ruled that cable providers can now count public access costs against their 5%, which they didn't used to be able to do. So that will increase the pressure on them to reduce those services. The interesting question becomes, would we someday award a video franchise to somebody other than a cable provider? And I don't know if we can even do that under the RSAs.
And that's part of the conversation that we've had, that right now, both the state and the federal legislation really limit municipalities' ability to regulate in this field to just cable television. So that's why it's kind of good that we're having this different thinking about how to encourage a conversation, how to remove barriers to competition, because we don't have that, ability to arm twist a little bit, other than in that very narrow field of cable television. So that's why when you look at the franchise fee agreement, or the franchise agreement that we have right now with Comcast, it doesn't cover the internet broadband side of the house. It literally just covers that narrow piece, and so that's precisely the issue.
Yeah.
I have two comments to offer that, and I just want to first of all say that's a salient point, and I want to make sure we're not misrepresenting our supposed powers here. There are limits, right, to what we could do vis-a-vis the federal laws,
And state laws.
and state laws, to that same degree. The question we wonder about too is that we would like to know more about how the wireless providers secure property to secure their towers in the city of Portsmouth. And I'm not saying we would necessarily bring that to bear as a lever, but it's something to be considered. That, number one, removing barriers to this one thing, but also, should things not go the way we want, it could become a lever the other direction, possibly, as they look to satisfy their subscribers.
Right, there's always been a coverage gap, a dead zone down around Little Harbor Road and south part of the city. And efforts to put towers in there have been beaten back by citizen opposition. So, would your commission, your commission could be a voice in that discussion. Maybe there's a public benefit that outweighs the private benefit.
Absolutely. I've noticed around Portsmouth Hospital itself, it's stunning how poor the reception and the data speeds are and stuff, and that almost brings a safety issue into question.
Right.
And proximity to 95 is stunning, that the service is so bad that close to a major federal highway. But anyway.
Yeah.
I actually applaud you for bringing these changes forward. I think it brings Portsmouth into the 21st century where we haven't been. We haven't been talking about broadband internet in the way that we should have been for a while now. And it is the reality for us now that this is what the majority of consumers use. And when we talk about cell phone towers in particular, we are talking about public safety because the majority of homeowners no longer have a landline at home, so they rely upon a cell phone signal, and if not a cell phone signal, an internet signal and Wi-Fi to make phone calls, emergency phone calls. So I think it's critical that we have this discussion, and even if we don't have much regulatory power here, that we can at least have conversations and put some pressure to improve service. One of the things that, if you haven't considered yet, I would love to see some consideration of ways that we can approach state and federal government with requests for funding grants to expand broadband access in Portsmouth. We see a lot of commentary at the federal level about lack of broadband in rural areas. I think sometimes people forget that we have dead zones within cities as well. And that while Portsmouth is a very wealthy city, we're very fortunate. We do have a lot of residents that don't have access in the way that they should to broadband, and also not to a cell phone signal. So, yeah. So, I really appreciate you coming forward with these recommended changes.
Thank you. I have one other observation and a question, and maybe I'm premature, but I was discussing with Suzanne the idea of us soliciting the citizens of Portsmouth to get their feedback to find hotspots and areas instead of waiting for people who get irritated to complain to us. Is there any provision, should this be in this revision to authorize us to solicit information, or is there already a channel for that available through the city council or the city government?
Interesting.
The Cable Commission has done a survey in the past during a franchise renewal, and we just found we actually did a formal survey over 10 years ago, where we found, a couple $1,000s is what it was at the time to do a survey through the UNH Survey Center. I'm sure that cost has gone up. I think what we could do is we could talk amongst the staff and the resources that we have now to see, is there a good way to push out a survey that's kind of cost effective, or some other means of trying to solicit additional information, but that's something we can look at.
So we don't anticipate the need to authorize that through this or anything? Okay.
No.
Thank you.
No, that's
Yeah, I
just
think
good
that-
public engagement.
Yes, if the request came forward for a survey to the city council, then the city council could consider ways to fund it. If not, if it wasn't already envisioned by the city manager, may have had a budget for these things already, so,
And that's something we can look at and talk with the Cable Commission about.
yes. Are there any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, thank you. I think it's reasonable to have everyone sit with these changes, these recommended changes, until our next meeting. But they seem pretty straightforward to me. So I think that this is something that we could definitely consider, if it's the will of the committee, at the next meeting about whether or not to move forward with these recommended changes to the council.
All right, this is
Thank you.
next subject.
All right. With that said, we will come back to this again at our next meeting. And the last item under our committee's ordinances review today is the Historical Archive Blue Ribbon Committee proposal, which I believe Councilor Lombardi has been working on with our legal department. So I'm going to turn it over to Councilor Lombardi to give us an update on where we stand.
Well, our Christine from the library produced a draft of the purpose and charge of the Blue Ribbon Committee. I only have one more. I don't know if you want to see it.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
And I'll give this to Suzanne. I had emailed it to, oh, you have it? Okay. I took just a shot at it to try to make it clearer. I didn't really change much of the content of it. But what I would basically suggest at this time is to, we can look at this and add to it or subtract from it. But my suggestion at this point would be to actually contact the Athenaeum, Strawberry Bank, Portsmouth Historical Society, which are the key or the primary organizations I think that might participate, and just have conversations about whether or not they actually would want to join this effort. You know, these are assumptions that we made. And so, you know, it's worth maybe at this point just to contact them, see if there's a representative from each of these organizations that might spend a little time with us in fleshing this out. So I'd be happy to do that. No, I'll talk to Christine about that. And so, I mean, that's basically where we are with it. It's not, we haven't gotten very far, but at least we have something down in writing.
Yes. That's good.
I think this is great progress and clarifies the thinking. And the next step, the logical step, as you say, is we get the stakeholders together and get their thoughts. And then what needs to be funded and how would we fund it? The only other question in my mind is, how do we ensure everyone has access? Because these, you know, if we take over a public function here, we need to have public access.
Right. I think we had talked about that in terms of, it is a city-run facility, but that the various entities have their space and have access to that space. I would say that paper documents, part of the effort in the long term would be for imaging documents. I know the Athenaeum has already spent a good, I think they have a huge amount of their collections already imaged and online. I know especially their photographic collection is phenomenal like that. So there are documents that you probably don't want a lot of people handling, and that's a good reason to do that.
I think this is a great place to start and to have these conversations. You know, I think at this stage, what we're really doing is we're asking these entities if they want to participate in a Blue Ribbon Committee to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so I really think that it would be their roles ultimately to discuss and to find a way to proceed and to decide then at that Blue Ribbon Committee level if there is an interest, a sincere interest in creating a community-wide archive, and then what the best practices would be for that. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert on how that should be handled, and I think that really they're the experts in what they want or what they envision. And then, you know, ultimately, if they have recommendations, like any committee, it would come back to the city council if they have recommendations for the council to proceed. And for all we know, they'll come back and say, you know, we've decided on a private process. And by working together, we've created a private process and we don't need action at the city level, although we would love to have a grant from the city, or, you know, so we don't know exactly. I don't want to predetermine what they're going to come back with. But I think it's a good place to start, to at least have the conversations, see if they're willing to serve on a Blue Ribbon Committee, get everyone together on a regular basis then at the Blue Ribbon Committee level to have the conversations.
Well, I will pursue that then.
I suspect we'll find the Athenaeum, Strawberry Bank, both have the issue, and the library, they all have the issue of we have more collections than we have space.
Yeah.
And the amount is growing. And I know they're looking at considerable off-site storage expense. So maybe there's a meeting of the minds that can occur.
Right.
I know for a fact that the Athenaeum is dealing with this right now. You know, so.
Well, and the city's also dealing with this challenge.
Yeah, and the city is too, yeah. In our damp basement.
That's right, in the police station.
And keep in mind, for the city, there are two types of records. There are those who are required to keep
Right.
as a result of state law or business-type records. And then this whole other realm that the library is particularly shepherd of, which is we may not be required to keep them for public records purposes under state law or federal law, depending on if it's, related to grant monies we received or something. But they're important to part of, the history of Portsmouth. And so that's a whole nother realm of records, which,
Right.
the library keeps a hold of and is a great resource that actually we use
Yeah.
at a staff level when we're looking for a little bit of history on something, to be able to reach out to the library and see what they can find for us, so.
That's perfect.
Great.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
I think we're ready to move on then. Other business? Does anyone have any other business to raise?
Okay.
Not for me.
I should note under other business that I anticipate at our next meeting that we will have some recommendations on policies related to rotation of terms and appointments. I expect those to come back from legal at our next meeting, potentially. And we still have a lot of things sitting on the agenda, from sidewalk policy to review of donations policy and conflict of interest still. So there are a lot of additional things that we're going to get to, but that we're currently working with the legal department on and making sure that we have good language to bring back to the committee for discussion. The only thing I have for other business is scheduling of our meetings. So I want to go through our schedules and see if
You
we
want to
can.
have public comment first?
I'll go to public comment
Okay.
immediately after. So, but I thought we should schedule our next several meetings. This committee we seem to function better when we have a long-term plan. So,
It also allows the public to know what our cadence of meetings is.
exactly. We had been meeting on a 2-week basis, generally. That would put the next meeting on the 12th. I should note that the council also has an ARPA work session that evening. But if we postpone till the 19th, we actually have city council that evening,
Right.
the evening of the 19th.
I will not be here on the 12th. I expect to be holding my new granddaughter. So
Sounds wonderful.
And I'm
I
going to be,
could, well, I just don't know.
I don't think I would commit to something.
and I'm scheduled to be on a flight to Oaxaca, Mexico on that.
Well then, we won't be meeting on the 12th. Let's look at another day.
How about the 26th?
That's Rosh Hashanah.
Oh, it is? Why isn't that on my calendar?
That's what's popping up on my phone calendar.
Yeah, the 25th through the 27th,
Yeah,
I think
that
I
is,
have marked
that's
out. Yeah, September's a challenge because we have a lot of holidays. What if we instead looked at a day other than Monday then?
That's what I was going to suggest.
What if we did like Wednesday the 21st?
That's good for me.
Yeah, that's good.
Does that work? 10 o'clock?
Always 10 o'clock, right?
Yes, usually,
Okay.
if that works for the staff. It was a matter of when the room is available, so that's why we are scheduled at 10 usually.
I can move something else around, she says.
I think that we need to make sure that we have the city attorney
Stuff by then, yeah.
available, Bob Sullivan,
Yep.
on that date.
Okay. I'll have to check his calendar.
Okay. We can try to, if we can try to hold that time for him. I think
21st at 10?
The 21st at 10. And then after that, we're going into October. Because we, again, have a Monday holiday on October the 10th, and the 3rd is city council,
So the 17th?
we could either go to the 17th or we could stick with a Wednesday.
I kind of prefer the Mondays, if that's
Okay.
possible, but
Okay?
17th then?
How's October 17th
Yep.
at 10 o'clock? I should know that there's a noon meeting in this room that day, so we should make sure
we can be.
we can be done. Then the next meeting is
Halloween.
Halloween, October 31st.
That ought to be good for us.
Yeah, that's a good day for us.
Just go.
And then we're again going to encounter our city council in November. Maybe we should leave that through October, those 3 meetings. Is that enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. With that done, if there's no other business, let's move to public comment. Do we have any members of the public who want to speak?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Morning, Peter Huda, 280 South Street. My comments are for you to consider. First, on the Public Art Committee, under the membership and term, I would like you to consider changing one word. In the middle of the member of the city staff to be designated by the city manager, I would ask you to put in there recommended. My reasoning for that is the city council makes policy, and to keep it consistent with the city, the mayor and the city council looking at this and considering everybody that comes forward, it would be the same thing. So the city manager would recommend somebody to the mayor, and then the mayor would put it up for a vote. That was my first thing. I have questions on number 3 under powers and duties. My question is, I don't understand what the marketing of our public art collection means and why it is in here. I mean, that statement to me says we're trying to sell it. I don't understand how the taxpayers would be involved in this. Excuse me. The next thing I would like to say is I totally support Council Lombardi's position on the art on private property. I urge you to consider, if you're running this through the land boards, back it up and think about how anybody proposing a project would have to handle this. I'm assuming that they would have to come forward to any of the land use boards and put this in their proposal for the land use boards to consider. So this would add an extra burden basically on anybody who wanted to do a public or private project. And I think private property, I agree with Councilor Lombardi. You're on kind of thin ice there with telling people what color to paint their house or what they're doing. This is kind of like paint. And I remember when I went through the boards, this is one of the subjects that's kind of off limits to some of the boards. So I would just put that out for your consideration. The other thing I would like to bring to your attention is on the actual ordinance, the public art commitment. So the commitment on section 1.1702 says this is for municipal buildings, which the bid price is from $2 million to $15 million. So this is buildings. That's the first thing. And in the exemption, we're going to buildings, municipal buildings, such as water or sewer plants for public art commitment. So I guess my question to you to think about is, are the taxpayers better served on this by letting this money go back into the water and sewer projects? As lately, we've had overruns in all of our projects. So, I mean, it's not 1% of the amount is not much, but it still would serve to consider the city council bonding less for projects that are overrunning or surprising. And I would note that Pierce Island was a project like that. When the sewer line broke, they had to come back to us for $3.6 million. Sagamore Creek is the same thing. We started out at 4.4. Now we keep going up. So I don't know if there's any pump houses that would require city art, but I'm sure that the residents would appreciate any money going forward, go back into here. And it's just something for you to consider. The other thing is, one last thing here. On your, I don't know what page it is, section 1.1707, funding accepted. The question I would have is, in the second sentence, with the designated purpose to commission works of public art to be placed on public property. When you're accepting this, I guess my question here would be, will this be a public hearing? Will the people be able to have input on any of this? Since you're accepting these donations, I guess, for the benefit of the public here, and we generally have public comment on that. Just some questions. I know you'll be discussing this going forward, and some things to consider. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments on Zoom?
Yes.
Thank you for joining us. Yes.
Okay, you guys don't have my hand thing, but yeah, this is Susan Sterry, and I live at 548 Broad Street in Portsmouth. And as you also know, I'm co-chair of the cemetery committee. Right now, I want to speak about the archive decisions, or starting a committee. I've been doing research in those three areas: the Athenaeum, the city reference, and the historic. And unfortunately, there is no public access to Strawberry Bank, and a lot of the history that I may be looking for may be sitting there. So in that note, the last 6 months I've spent a lot of time trying to research our cemeteries and to find the burial records, not the death records of people going as far back as we can possibly find. Churches change names and cemeteries change names. My point being is that between talking to the Athenaeum and the city library and in Concord, there is no centralized area right now that provides, I can't say in-depth, but catalog that who has what, wherever. So many a time I will go to the Athenaeum and we'll try to find stuff, and then we'll get a lead to go over here, and then you go there, and no, it hasn't been there for a long time. So there's a lot of confusion out there in the archive world, I guess is what you would say. And I was just speaking to them at the Athenaeum last week, and I brought up the subject that this archive committee might be starting up. And their first response was, oh, we've heard that. This is third or fourth time that a group of people were going to get together, do a collaborative, and, you know, get all our stuff in one place, because right now it's all over the state, not just in the city of New Hampshire. In the city of Portsmouth. So that was the first reaction, but then I said, no, maybe we can make this much more serious this time out. So yes, they're gung-ho. I can't speak for them, publicly, but they are certainly very interested. And Jamie had said that the woman at Strawberry Bank, he was quite sure that she would be interested in too, because everybody's paperwork is all over the place. So, I don't know, this might just be the right time and the right place for a committee like this to start. But I just really wanted to put that out there so that you guys won't think that there isn't an interest, because there is a big interest. And as usual, it might depend on who the players are and personalities, but I know at a working level that it's long overdue. And the other thing that came up in the discussion was that now that the Lister school was going to be available, a lot of people think that might be a perfect site for a potential archives going forward. And I know that's jumping ahead, way out there, but it is part of the conversation out in the community. So I guess I'm advocating that we would get a potential blue ribbon committee together so that we can really find out exactly what the needs are, how to go about it, and get the ball rolling. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us and speaking today.
Thank you.
Seeing no other public comment, I'll close the public comment session. I look forward to seeing you all again for our next meeting in September, which will continue the discussion around the issues we talked about today. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
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 All right, we are adjourned.